The cabin of United Airlines Flight 2247 is 35,000 feet above the American heartland, somewhere over the flat gray expanse of Kansas, when the woman in 14B does something that makes every passenger within 4 rows go completely silent. She reaches across the aisle. She wraps both hands around a small, polished mahogany box sitting in the lap of the man in 14A, and she pulls. "I told you," she says, loud enough that the flight attendant 3 rows back snaps her head around. "This thing has been poking into my personal space this entire flight, and I am done." The man in 14A does not move immediately. He is somewhere in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered in the way that men who spent decades carrying weight tend to remain even after the weight is gone. His hair is silver at the temples. His hands, which had been resting gently on either side of that mahogany box the way you might hold something irreplaceable, freeze in midair for exactly 1 second as the woman yanks the box toward herself. Then his face does something that the passenger in 15A, a retired schoolteacher from Dayton named Carol Metcalf, will describe to her daughter that night as the most heartbreaking thing I have ever seen on any airplane in 60 years of flying. His jaw tightens. His eyes, which had been closed in something that looked like prayer, open slowly. And what is inside them is not anger. Not yet. It is grief. Raw, oceanic, completely undefended grief. "Ma'am," he says, and his voice is very quiet. "Please put that down. I will put it down when you stop letting it take up my armrest space," the woman says. She is somewhere in her late 40s, dressed in what appears to be expensive athleisure, wearing a shade of coral that is fighting aggressively with the blue cabin lighting. Her hair is highlighted in the specific blonde that costs a significant amount of money to make look natural and fails. She has been, as 3 separate passengers will later testify, awful since the moment she walked onto this aircraft. "That box," the man says, still very quiet, "contains my son." The woman opens her mouth. She closes it. She opens it again. "Well," she says, "it should be in the overhead bin." 22 rows of passengers hear this. The flight attendant walking toward them from the back galley, whose name tag reads Torres and who has been a United crew member for 11 years, stops walking. The man in 12C, who had been watching a movie on his laptop, removes his headphones. The elderly couple in 16A and 16B simultaneously look up from their crossword puzzle. And somewhere in the cockpit at the front of this Boeing 737-800 carrying 287 passengers and 6 crew members on a route from Los Angeles International to Dulles International, the captain, whose name is listed on the crew manifest as Captain Raymond Okafor, has absolutely no idea yet what is unfolding in row 14. He will know very soon. What is also unfolding, though no one on this aircraft knows it yet except the 6 crew members who have already recognized the man in 14A and spent the last 40 minutes communicating about it in the galley in urgent, emotional whispers, is that Flight 2247 is about to become the most documented, most discussed, and most consequential civilian airline incident of the year. Because the woman in 14B just made the worst mistake of her life. And she made it in front of an entire crew that would die before they let it stand. To understand how Deborah Langston, because that is her name, and it will become very publicly her name before this day is over, came to be sitting in 14B on United Flight 2247, you have to go back approximately 6 weeks, to a Tuesday afternoon in the Calabasas offices of a mid-sized real estate development firm where Deborah is a senior account manager, a title she mentions within 4 minutes of meeting anyone new. Deborah has a particular relationship with the airline industry. She has flown approximately 40 times in the last 3 years, and she has filed 27 formal complaints with various airlines in that same period. 27. The complaints range from legitimate grievances, a lost bag, a genuine 3-hour delay, to entries that airline customer service representatives have privately categorized in their internal notes with terms like aggressive entitlement and unreasonable expectation of special treatment. There was the complaint about the child 2 rows ahead of her who cried for 40 minutes on a flight from Denver. There was the complaint about a flight attendant who looked at her dismissively. There was the complaint, filed with Delta Airlines in March of the previous year, about a fellow passenger who she claimed had violated her breathing space by existing too broadly in a middle seat. Deborah travels in first class when her company pays. When her company does not pay, She books economy and then spends the flight behaving as though a clerical error is responsible for her seat assignment. She is, in the vocabulary of airline industry professionals, a Category 4. The kind of passenger that crew members identify by the way they walk down the jetway. The kind of passenger whose energy changes the cabin atmosphere the moment they board. She boarded Flight 2247 at LAX at 11:47 in the morning, carrying a tote bag that she had already been asked to consolidate twice at the gate, once by the gate agent, a young man named Felipe who had patiently explained that the regulations required bags to fit in the overhead bin, and once by the lead flight attendant, senior purser Marcus Webb, who had been watching the boarding process from the forward galley with the specific attention he gives to passengers he has mentally flagged. Marcus Webb has been flying for United for 16 years. He is 51 years old, originally from Baltimore, and he has a way of reading people in the first 30 seconds of a boarding process that his junior crew members find almost supernatural. He has pulled Air Marshal's attention to passengers who later turned out to be genuine threats. He has quietly rerouted medical situations before they became emergencies. He has, on 4 separate occasions over 16 years, talked people out of genuine in-flight breakdowns by doing nothing more than sitting next to them and speaking calmly. When Deborah Langston walked down the jetway at LAX, Marcus Webb clocked her in 6 seconds and said nothing, only made a small, specific eye contact with flight attendant Torres that communicated everything. What Marcus Webb did not clock, could not have clocked, because the boarding process was hectic and the gate had been overloaded and this was not the kind of thing that showed up on a manifest, was the passenger who boarded 4 minutes later, moving slowly, carrying only a small backpack and a mahogany box held against his chest with both hands the way you carry something you are not entirely certain you are allowed to put down. His name is Colonel James Whitfield, retired, United States Marine Corps, 26 years of service that included 3 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, and a final posting as a battalion commander that his Marines still talk about in the specific reverent shorthand of men who would follow a person into genuine danger. He retired 14 months ago, not by choice. His son, Lance Corporal David Whitfield, was killed in a training accident at Camp Pendleton 8 weeks before James Whitfield's mandatory retirement date. David was 22 years old. He had followed his father into the Marines the way some sons follow fathers into businesses or trades, with a specific kind of devotion that is both beautiful and, it turned out, devastating to witness from the outside. The mahogany box contains David's cremated remains. James Whitfield had spent the last 6 weeks in Los Angeles completing the paperwork, the legal proceedings, the particular bureaucratic nightmare that attaches itself to a military death like a secondary wound. He is flying home to Virginia, where David grew up, where David's mother, James's ex-wife, Patricia, is waiting, because they are going to scatter David's ashes at the Shenandoah Overlook where David proposed to his high school girlfriend at 17 years old, in the particular earnest way of teenage boys who do not yet know how large the world is. He boarded the plane in the specific fog of grief that experienced travelers recognize and instinctively give space to. He found his seat. He placed the backpack in the overhead bin. He sat down. He held the box in his lap with both hands and closed his eyes. He did not notice the woman in 14B until she elbowed him, hard, in the ribs, 40 minutes into the flight, and told him his box was taking up the armrest. He explained quietly what the box was. She told him it belonged in the overhead bin. He said he preferred to keep it with him. She said that wasn't her problem. He said, still quietly, still patiently, the way a man who has commanded 400 Marines in actual crisis situations tends to speak in ordinary conflicts, that he was not going to place his son in an overhead bin. She said, then I guess we have a problem, because I paid for this seat and its armrest. And then she reached over and took the box. Flight attendant Torres reaches row 14 in approximately 4 seconds from the moment she hears the man's voice say, that box contains my son. She has been flying for 11 years. She has handled medical emergencies, weather diversions, passenger altercations, and one memorable transatlantic flight during which 2 separate passengers independently decided they were having spiritual crises. She has never, in 11 years, felt her hands go cold the way they go cold when she processes what she is looking at in row 14. The woman in 14B has a mahogany box in her hands. The man in 14A has his hands still hovering in the air where the box was. Ma'am, Torres says, and her voice is absolutely, Completely level in the specific way that airline crew are trained to speak when they want to project calm into a situation that is not calm. I need you to return that item to the gentleman immediately. This thing was poking into my space, Deborah says, not lowering her voice at all, because Deborah Langston has never, in 47 years of living, lowered her voice when she believed she was right. He's been holding it in his lap this entire flight, and it keeps touching my armrest, and I have paid for this seat. Ma'am, Torres says again, that is a cremation urn. Please return it to him now. The word urn lands in the cabin air like a dropped instrument. The passengers in the surrounding rows who had been watching with the particular hunched attention of people trying to look like they are not watching suddenly stop pretending. The word travels. You can track it moving backward through the cabin by the sequence of people going still. Deborah Langston looks down at the box in her hands. Something moves across her face that is almost recalibration. Almost. But Deborah Langston has spent 47 years developing a very particular psychological immune system against information that complicates her sense of grievance, and it activates now with impressive efficiency. It doesn't matter what it is, she says. The rules say personal items go in the overhead bin. I have very sensitive anxiety, and this is affecting my personal well-being. James Whitfield reaches across and takes the box from her hands. Not forcefully, not grabbing, simply reaching over with both hands and taking what belongs to him, the way you take something back from a person who has confused your property with theirs. He places the box back in his lap. He covers it with both his hands. He does not look at Deborah Langston. He looks at Torres. And Torres, who has been a flight attendant for 11 years and who has seen many things, has a moment that she will describe later to Marcus Webb in the forward galley as, my chest just breaking completely in half. Because what is in James Whitfield's eyes is not anger at Deborah, is not embarrassment at the scene, is not even the careful expressionlessness of a man trying to hold himself together in public. What is in his eyes is an apology to her for the disruption, for the difficulty, for existing in a space where this person has made his grief into a scene. The apology breaks something in Torres that she is going to need a few minutes alone in the aft galley to deal with. But not yet, because Deborah Langston is not finished. I want to move seats, Deborah announces to Torres. I want to be moved immediately. This man is creating a hostile environment. Ma'am, Torres says, and anyone who has ever been on a flight where a crew member's voice drops to a specific register of professional steel will recognize exactly what Torres's voice is doing right now. Every seat on this aircraft is occupied. There is nowhere to move you. Then move him. The passenger in 15A, Carol Metcalf, the retired schoolteacher from Dayton, says, very clearly, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." This is when Deborah Langston turns around and informs Carol Metcalf that she can mind her own business. This is when the man in 13B, who is a pediatric surgeon from Chicago named Dr. Aiden Park, who has said nothing so far and who will later describe himself as a very conflict-averse person, generally speaking, takes out his earbuds and says, "Actually, I think it's everyone's business at this point." This is when the college student in 16A looks up from his phone and starts, though no one notices this yet, recording. Marcus Webb in the forward galley feels the quality of sound change in the cabin in the way that experienced senior pursers feel it, the way a ship's captain feels a change in swells, and he moves. He reaches row 14 in 12 seconds. He takes one look at what he is looking at. Torres standing in the aisle, the woman in 14B visibly furious and growing louder, the man in 14A with both hands around a mahogany box and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, and Marcus Webb undergoes a very specific experience. Because Marcus Webb, who has been flying United for 16 years and who served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps before that, including 1 year at Camp Lejeune that overlapped with a certain battalion commander's posting, has recognized the man in 14A since the moment he boarded. He recognized him when he walked down the jetway. He said nothing because it was not his place and because the man was clearly traveling in private grief, and Marcus Webb respects private grief the way you respect a wound. He had gone back to the galley and told Torres and told the other 4 crew members on this flight, all of whom had their own connections to the man in 14A that Marcus Webb did not yet fully know but was beginning to piece together, and they had made a collective decision to give James Whitfield space and dignity and whatever quiet comfort they could offer over the course of this flight. They had not anticipated Deborah Langston. Marcus Webb looks at James Whitfield. James Whitfield looks back at Marcus Webb, and something passes between them that is not words, because men who have served together, or served in the same corps, the same years, the same weight of it, have a communication that doesn't need words. Marcus Webb puts his hand very briefly on James Whitfield's shoulder. Then he turns to Deborah Langston. "Ma'am," he says, "I need to speak with you." What happens in the next 40 minutes on United Flight 2247 is documented by 11 separate passengers on their phones, 3 of whom are streaming live to social media platforms before Deborah Langston even realizes what is happening, and one of whom, the college student in 16A, whose name is Tyler Huang and who is studying journalism at USC and who will later reflect that this is not exactly how he imagined his first viral story, captures the entire sequence in a single unbroken recording. That will be viewed 64 million times in the following 6 days. Marcus Webb speaks to Deborah Langston in the aisle of row 14 in a voice that is professional, measured, and absolutely inflexible. He explains that she is to remain in her seat, that she is not to touch the belongings of any other passenger, that she is not to raise her voice in the cabin. He explains this with the specific authority of a man who has been a senior purser for 16 years and who spent 6 years before that learning what genuine authority looks like. Deborah Langston, who has successfully browbeaten airline staff on approximately 19 of her 27 complaint-generating flights, tries to apply that experience here. She asks for Marcus Webb's employee number. She informs him that she knows the CEO of United Airlines personally, which is not true. She says she has a heart condition that is being aggravated by this interaction, which the passenger in 13C, who is a cardiologist, hears and notes privately is being delivered in the robust tones of someone whose cardiovascular system is functioning at full capacity. She then makes the specific error that turns a cabin conflict into something else entirely. She stands up. She points at James Whitfield. She says, loudly enough that every passenger within 8 rows hears it clearly, "This man is mentally unstable. He's holding a box and talking about his dead son, and he's been staring into space this entire flight, and I don't feel safe." The cabin goes so quiet that you can hear, as the college student's recording will later make achingly clear, the low constant note of the engines at cruising altitude. James Whitfield does not move. He does not look at her. He keeps both hands on the mahogany box. Torres, standing 3 feet away, closes her eyes for half a second. Marcus Webb looks at Deborah Langston for a long moment. Then he picks up the cabin interphone handset from the panel on the bulkhead wall and calls the cockpit. Captain Raymond Okafor has been flying for United for 22 years. He is a former Navy pilot, 6 years carrier-based, which means he has landed jets on the deck of a ship in the middle of the ocean at night, which means that a cabin disruption, even a significant one, does not physically elevate his heart rate. What it does is sharpen his focus to a very specific point, like light through a lens. He listens to Marcus Webb for 45 seconds. He asks 2 questions. He gets 2 answers. He says, "I'll make an announcement and then I'm coming back." The interphone clicks. Deborah Langston, who has watched this exchange with a new expression on her face that is not quite confidence anymore, sits back down. The PA system activates. Captain Okafor's voice fills the cabin, formal and calm in the specific register of pilots who have been trained to project normalcy into abnormal situations. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently at 35,000 feet on our way to Washington Dulles with approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes of flight time remaining. I want to take a moment to ask for your patience and cooperation as my crew addresses a situation in the cabin. United Airlines takes the safety and comfort of all passengers extremely seriously, and I want to assure you that everything is under control. I also want to take a personal moment to acknowledge that we have a Gold Star family member traveling with us today, carrying the remains of a fallen United States Marine. On behalf of the entire crew of Flight 2247, we are honored to have you with us, sir. We will be with you momentarily." The announcement ends. 3 passengers begin to cry immediately, including Carol Metcalf in 15A, who has been holding it together since the word son, and is no longer holding anything together. Deborah Langston's face undergoes a significant change in color. And from the forward section of the aircraft, where 3 first-class passengers have overheard the PA announcement and have been given context by the flight attendant working first class, whose name is Chan, and who served 4 years in the Marine Corps Reserves before becoming a flight attendant, and who has known since the boarding process exactly who was in 14A, there is the sound of someone beginning to applaud. It spreads. Captain Raymond Okafor emerges from the cockpit with the door secured behind him and the first officer holding authority up front, which is standard procedure whenever a captain needs to address a cabin situation personally. He is tall, in his early 50s, with the specific posture of someone who has spent years in environments where posture is trained into the body. He moves down the aisle in his four-stripe uniform without particular hurry. He stops at row 14. He looks at James Whitfield. He says very quietly, so that only the immediate rows hear, "Colonel Whitfield." Something in James Whitfield's face shifts, just slightly, the way a very controlled surface shifts when something underneath it recognizes something. "I'm Captain Raymond Okafor," the captain says. "United Airlines, formerly Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, USS Carl Vinson, 2004 to 2010. He pauses. "I never served with you directly, sir, but I know who you are, and I know why you're on this flight, and I want you to know that this aircraft, and everyone on it, is going to take care of you." He then turns to Deborah Langston, and his voice does not change in volume or in apparent temperature, but something in it becomes very different. "Ma'am," he says, "my purser has briefed me on the events in this row. I need you to understand that what you have done today has been documented, witnessed by multiple passengers and crew members, and will be reported to United Airlines upon landing. I also need to inform you that there is a federal air marshal on this aircraft who has been observing this situation and who will now be moving to a seat adjacent to yours for the remainder of the flight. You will not speak to, touch, or approach the passenger in 14A in any way for the remainder of this flight. If you do, this aircraft will be diverted and you will be removed. Do you understand?" Deborah Langston says, in a voice that has lost approximately 80% of its previous certainty, "I want to file a complaint." "You are welcome to do that on the ground," Captain Okafor says. "Do you understand my instructions?" A pause. "Yes." The captain nods. He looks once more at James Whitfield. He says, still quietly, "David." James Whitfield nods. Captain Okafor closes his eyes for one brief second. He opens them. "We've got him," he says, "all the way home." And then, because he is a captain and his aircraft has 287 passengers and 2 hours of flight remaining, he returns to the cockpit. What no one has yet told Deborah Langston, because it has been deliberately, methodically withheld, the way you withhold the final piece of a case until exactly the right moment, is the full extent of what she stumbled into in row 14 of United Flight 2247. Marcus Webb in the galley is about to tell her. The Federal Air Marshal's name is Special Agent Diane Kowalski, and she has been seated in 22C since boarding, and she has been watching row 14 since approximately 6 minutes into the flight, which is when a flight attendant named Torres made eye contact with her in the way that crew and air marshals have communicated since the system was expanded after 2001. She is compact, professional, and she moves to the empty jump seat adjacent to row 14 with the efficiency of someone who has done this transition many times and wants it to be noticed without being dramatic. Deborah Langston notices. Whatever residual certainty she had been running on depletes visibly. Marcus Webb crouches in the aisle next to Deborah Langston's seat. His voice, when he speaks, is not unkind. It is not cruel. It is simply the voice of a man who has decided that a specific truth needs to be delivered clearly and without embellishment. "I want to explain something to you," he says, "about the flight you are on today." He tells her, not everything, just enough. He tells her that the 6 crew members of Flight 2247, himself, Torres, Chan, First Officer Williams, Flight Attendant Brooks, and Captain Okafor, include 3 who served in the United States Marine Corps, 1 Navy pilot, 1 Army veteran who transitioned to aviation, and 1 whose brother was in David Whitfield's unit at Camp Pendleton and who knew David personally. He tells her that Colonel James Whitfield commanded a battalion of 400 Marines for 3 years, and that 2 of the crew members on this aircraft served under that command, and that they have all known since the boarding process exactly who was in 14A. He tells her that the mahogany box she picked up and called a personal item in front of a grieving father contains the cremated remains of a 22-year-old Marine named David Whitfield who was killed 8 weeks ago, and whose father has been in Los Angeles for 6 weeks completing the specific bureaucratic aftermath of a military death. and who is on this flight to bring his son home to Virginia. He tells her that the entire incident has been recorded by multiple passengers and that several of those recordings are, as they speak, being uploaded to platforms with a combined reach of several 100 million people. He tells her none of this with cruelty. He tells her with the flat precision of someone who wants to make sure they are understood. Deborah Langston is quiet for a very long time. Then she says, "I didn't know." "No," Marcus Webb says. "You didn't. And if you had, I genuinely hope it would have changed your behavior. But I need you to understand something. The reason it matters that you didn't know is this: you behaved that way toward another human being on this aircraft before you knew any of those things. You took something out of another person's hands and you called his grief an inconvenience. And you did it before you knew who he was. That's actually the more important part." He stands up. He goes back to the galley. He takes 2 minutes alone, facing the forward bulkhead, which no one mentions in their accounts but which Torres, who is the only one who sees it, will remember for a long time. In the forward galley, over the next 30 minutes, something happens on United Flight 2247 that has nothing to do with Deborah Langston. A flight attendant named Brooks, 29 years old, who served 2 years in the Marine Corps Reserves before a knee injury ended his service and who knew David Whitfield's unit the way you know units when you've served adjacent to them, puts together a tray. It has coffee, the specific dark roast that United carries, and a meal that technically falls outside the service parameters for economy class, and a small note written on United Airlines stationery. The note says, "We are honored to fly David home with you. Your crew, Flight 2247. He carries it to row 14. He places it on James Whitfield's tray table without saying a word. James Whitfield looks at the note. His hand goes to his mouth. He looks at Brooks, and Brooks nods once, and that is the entirety of the exchange, and the college student's recording captures all of it. Captain Okafor's voice comes over the PA once more, near the end of the flight, as they begin their descent toward Dulles. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into the Washington area shortly. I'd like to take one more moment before we do. A few of you have come to speak with my crew during this flight, and I am grateful for your support and your decency. I also want to acknowledge something. The man in row 14 has spent 6 weeks doing what Gold Star families do, navigating the very particular form of loss that comes with serving this country. He is bringing his son home. When we land at Dulles, I'm asking for your patience while we allow him to deplane first, and I'm asking that you take a moment, if you're willing, to acknowledge him as he passes. That is all. Thank you for flying with us." The applause begins before the PA clicks off. Carol Metcalf, who has been quietly crying for most of the last hour, begins to applaud. Dr. Aidan Park, the pediatric surgeon from Chicago, stands up in the aisle, which you are not supposed to do at this altitude but which he does anyway, and claps. Tyler Huang, still recording, says quietly to himself something that his microphone picks up, and that will be transcribed in approximately 900 online articles in the following week. "Oh man. Oh man, oh man, oh man." United Flight 2247 lands at Dulles at 6:42 in the evening, 17 minutes ahead of schedule, because Raymond Okafor has been pushing the throttle for the last hour for reasons that have nothing to do with fuel efficiency. They hold at the gate for 4 minutes. James Whitfield stands slowly. He holds the mahogany box against his chest with both hands. He moves into the aisle. The passengers around him are already standing, already moving back to give him space, in the natural choreography of human decency that this particular flight has arrived at after a very difficult journey. He walks up the aisle. The cabin, row by row, applauds. Not the polite, performative applause of airline announcements, but something more personal, more specific. Carol Metcalf reaches out and very briefly touches his arm as he passes. Dr. Park nods at him, and James Whitfield nods back. And in that exchange between two people who have never met and will likely never meet again is every word that neither of them would know how to say. Marcus Webb is standing at the forward galley. James Whitfield stops. They look at each other. "Semper Fi," Marcus says. James Whitfield says, "Semper Fi." His voice does not break on the words. His hands do not shake. He is a man who has commanded 400 Marines in actual danger, and he does not permit himself to come apart in public. Has not permitted it in 8 weeks of pure devastation. But his eyes say everything. He walks off the aircraft. the passengers begin to file out after him. In Deborah Langston's row, there is a specific and very noticeable social reorganization happening. The passengers around her have created a radius. No one looks at her directly. No one speaks to her. The college student, Tyler Huang, stops in the aisle when he reaches her row and looks at her for 3 full seconds, then looks at his phone, then continues walking. This moment will not make the final edit of Tyler's video, but he will think about it for a long time. Deborah Langston is the last passenger off the aircraft. She is not the last person off the aircraft. Special Agent Diane Kowalski walks off behind her. And waiting at the jetway, because Marcus Webb made 2 calls during the flight's final approach, are 2 Dulles Airport police officers and a United Airlines customer service supervisor whose expression suggests she has been thoroughly briefed. The consequences that unfold over the following 72 hours are thorough, documented, and public, because Tyler Huang's recording has been viewed 11 million times before Deborah Langston's Uber leaves the Dulles arrivals loop. United Airlines issues a statement within 18 hours acknowledging the incident, confirming that the behavior documented does not meet the standards of conduct expected on United aircraft, and announcing that the passenger in question has been placed on the airline's no-fly list pending review. The no-fly list action is confirmed as permanent 48 hours later, after a review that includes sworn statements from 6 crew members, testimony from 11 passengers, and video documentation that is, by that point, so thoroughly distributed online that it has been embedded in coverage by every major American news outlet. Deborah Langston's employer, the real estate development firm in Calabasas, releases a statement on the firm's website by the morning of the second day, saying only that the employee is no longer with the company. This is later characterized by people familiar with the situation as the most efficient termination in Calabasas real estate history, which says something about both Calabasas real estate and the speed at which HR departments move when 11 million people have seen something. The Federal Aviation Administration issues no new regulations as a result of Flight 2247, because none are needed. The crew's handling of the incident is reviewed by United's flight operations team and characterized as exemplary, professional, and precisely within established protocols. What does happen is that United Airlines quietly revises its internal training materials to include the incident as a case study in crew response to passenger distress, which is about as understated a form of institutional acknowledgement as is possible, but which Marcus Webb, when informed of it during a debrief, considers sufficient. The FAA's existing Regulation 14 CFR Part 91.11, the federal law prohibiting interference with flight crew, which carries penalties including fines and imprisonment, is referenced in the incident report filed by Special Agent Kowalski. Whether federal charges are ultimately pursued is a matter that the Department of Justice handles quietly, and that does not become public in the days following the incident. What does become public is that Deborah Langston's previous 27 airline complaints are being reviewed by 2 different carriers in light of the circumstances, which suggests something about the infrastructure of airline complaint management. Marcus Webb does 3 press requests and declines all of them, which surprises no one who knows Marcus Webb. Torres does 1 interview, briefly, for a local news affiliate, and says only that she is glad the situation was resolved and that she hopes James Whitfield and his family find peace. Brooks says nothing publicly, which is consistent with who Brooks is. Captain Okafor issues a short written statement through United's communications office saying he is proud of his crew and grateful to the passengers who responded with dignity. James Whitfield does not give any interviews. He does not have social media. He is not reachable for comment by any of the 14 journalists who attempt to contact him through various channels over the next week. What he does is go home to Virginia, where Patricia is waiting, and 2 days after Flight 2247 lands at Dulles, on a clear December morning when the Shenandoah is the specific gold of late autumn holding its last light, he and Patricia stand at an overlook where their son once proposed to a girl he loved, and they say goodbye to David in the way that parents who have run out of words say goodbye, which is without them, in the particular silence that is not the absence of everything but is, in fact, the presence of everything there is no language for. What stays with the passengers of Flight 2247 in the weeks that follow is not primarily the story of Deborah Langston, though her name circulates with the specific velocity of Internet outrage and then begins to fade with the specific mercy of Internet memory. What stays is the other thing, the crew who recognized a colonel and his son and made 2 calls in the galley. the pilot who pushed the throttle a little harder, the purser who put his hand on a grieving man's shoulder and told him his aircraft was going to take care of him, the flight attendant who wrote a note on United Airlines stationery. Tyler Huang, when he posts the final version of his recording, edited, contextualized, with a note at the beginning explaining what is being witnessed, adds only one line of his own commentary at the end. It says, "This is what it looks like when a crew takes care of one of their own." The comments section, which on the internet tends toward the catastrophic, is instead something else. It is people writing about their fathers, their sons, their brothers. It is veterans writing about the specific weight of bringing someone home. It is strangers writing to strangers about what it means to be in an enclosed space with grief and to choose, with the choice available to all of them, to respond to it with humanity. It is 64 million people watching a flight attendant write a note on an airplane. There is something in there about who we are and who we can choose to be at 35,000 feet. There is something in there about what it costs to carry someone home and what it means when the people around you understand that weight and decide, without being asked, to help you carry it. The engines of Flight 2247 have long since gone cold on a tarmac at Dulles. David Whitfield is home, and somewhere in the Shenandoah Valley, on a cold December morning, a father is standing at an overlook his son loved, watching light move across mountains, learning the impossible grammar of a world his son is no longer in. The crew of Flight 2247 gave him that. They gave him the flight home. They gave him the quiet professionalism of people who understood what was in that box and what it cost to carry it. They gave him, in 30,000 feet of air between Los Angeles and Virginia, the particular dignity of being seen. That is the story of United Airlines Flight 2247. That is the story of what it looks like when the right people are in the right places and they choose, in the face of cruelty, to be something better. If the story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone, if it moved you to think about the weight of what the people around you might be carrying through airports and across skies, share it, because the stories that remind us how to treat each other are the ones worth keeping alive. There are more of them where this came from. More flights, more moments, more ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances choosing decency over convenience and humanity over comfort. We will be here with every one of them. Until next time, safe travels.